we can have bills trying to give instead of offering long-term solutions from where we are. Mr. Speaker, we've seen that our budget as Senate is very low. It's actually the lowest budget in the whole Parliament. And some of these costs, like the court cases, you know, the costs are bared by the Senate. And this is an unnecessary cost because you look at some of the issues, they are already in place within the Constitution. And if they are taken care of, we do not need to have legal costs that are still in place and need to be taken care of. Otherwise, those funds should be used in other ways and ensuring that we have maximum participation, maximum public participation as per Article 118 of the Constitution. So with those few words, Mr. Speaker, I beg to disagree completely with this particular bill. And if you would allow, because you know soon we are going on recess, that if today you could even close on this bill, we vote on it as early as tomorrow, and focus on the bills that will be able to help us move forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Tabitha. Senator Edwin Sifuna.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. First of all, allow me to commend members of this committee. As you know, the committee is chaired by a former classmate of mine, Honorable Speaker. And it is such bold decisions that make me proud of being a member of this House, that we can look at legislation objectively and say we have issues with this proposed legislation and that we cannot support it. In fact, some of us have taken a position on previous legislation that has been sponsored to this House or originated from the National Assembly, that if a bill is unconstitutional, you should not even entertain the thought of subjecting it to a third reading where you then introduce amendments, because our position in the minority is that you cannot introduce any amendments to breathe life into an unconstitutional bill, and that an unconstitutional bill should be dealt with forthright from the beginning as an unconstitutional bill. So, Honorable Speaker, I see the members of this committee here are people that I would take their position very seriously. I see that Senator Catherine Muma is a member here, Senator Veronica Maina, and of course Andrew Omtata Okoiti, people whose advice on the constitutionality or otherwise of any piece of legislation I take very seriously. Honorable Speaker, there are 3 or 4 examples that I wanted to give, and I saw that the chair of the committee himself ran us through as a House some of those unconstitutional provisions, and this is what led to the conclusion by the committee that we as a House cannot abide by some of these proposals. But I want to challenge the committee that after we reject this bill, I think one of the problems we allow ourselves to get into, Honorable Speaker, is to allow such bills to originate from the National Assembly. How do they beat us to originating such legislation? In the historical relationship between these two houses, the Senate has always complained of being the one that is being sidelined, the one that is being undermined at every turn. Then if we are going to have legislation to repair that relationship, we as the wearer of the shoe, honestly, Honorable Chair, should be the ones originating the legislation that we believe will cure this particular problem. And I know that a bill originating from this House to cure this relationship would be far much purer, because we are motivated in this House by the desire to see these constitutional institutions working and nothing else. I would trust this House to prescribe the medicine to this problem than any other place. So, Honorable Chair, even as we argue for the rejection of this bill, even as we reject this bill, I would very much challenge the members of the JLAC committee to, with haste, put out our own version of a bill to guide the relationships between these two houses. It's unfortunate that the leader of majority is not in the House with us today. Honorable Cheruyot is somebody who has walked this journey of the relationship of these two houses, including the interpretation of Article 110, the matter that is before the Supreme Court, and what needs to be done. And he has cautioned us that during debate of this matter, we should not make it as if the entire National Assembly is in fact at odds with the Senate. And the best example, Honourable Speaker, was during the debate on the Division of Revenue Bill that was passed by this House, where it was clear that, in fact, it is only a small section of members of the National Assembly who think that everything should be perceived through the lenses of conflict between these two houses. But a vast majority of the members of the National Assembly, and you will see this demonstrated, Honourable Speaker, when we go to mediation over the Division of Revenue Bill, there are people who actually believe in devolution and making sure that these institutions of devolution, including the Senate, work. Honourable Speaker, as you yourself or the chair of the committee rightfully pointed out, if you look at a provision such as the one that you referred to, or the chair referred to, relating to when a dispute can be said to have arisen or when it needs to be dealt with in accordance to Article 110(3). Honourable Speaker, Section 6 of that bill wants to rewrite Article 110(3) of the Constitution, because the wording of Article 110(3), and I have my copy of the Constitution here, presupposes that any dispute will be dealt with prior to any of the bills being introduced in any or either of the houses. But what Section 6 of the bill proposes to do is to rewrite that to mean a bill can actually go before the House and undergo the first reading, but then to move the time frame at which point we can raise objection to that bill or declare a dispute under Article 110(3) to just before the second reading of the bill. Because, Mr. Speaker, the resolution of those questions needs to happen jointly and in the language of the Constitution under Article 110(3) before either House considers a bill. Now, I don't know what the National Assembly defines consideration as, or when consideration of a bill begins. But surely, Honourable Speaker, by the time you are introducing a bill at the first reading, that is consideration of the bill, and all matters must have been resolved before that is done. Secondly, Honourable Speaker, you yourself have made reference, and honourable colleagues who have spoken before me, to the provisions of Section 19(6) of the bill on the question of public participation. Again, Honourable Speaker, under Article 118 of the Constitution on public access and participation, there is a requirement, Honourable Speaker, that every single piece of legislation that is being considered by either House go through public participation. In fact, my argument, Honourable Speaker, is it doesn't matter where this bill originates. If a bill is introduced into this House from the National Assembly, my thinking is that as far as the Senate is concerned, as far as the Senate as a legislative body is concerned, that is the first time we are interacting with that bill, and therefore a key component of our consideration and passage of that bill is public participation, so that we as a House can never have an excuse to abdicate that responsibility and go through a bill or any proposal before this House without subjecting it to the constitutional requirement of public participation. When Senator Maanzo was speaking, he made reference to the housing bill that was introduced from the National Assembly as well. And Honourable Speaker, the Hansard will bear me witness that we in the minority...
Senator Sifuna, just hold. Senator Karen, the chair earlier on cautioned you against what you're doing. You're out of order. Proceed, Senator Sifuna.
Honourable Speaker, I was saying that if you look at the Hansard, we in the minority, during debate on the housing bill, were of the opinion that, in fact, because housing is a devolved function, because it is a legislative mandate of this House to deal with questions of housing, we needed to subject that bill to our own independent public participation to find out the views of Kenyans, Honourable Speaker. And the word of caution, of course, results from the fact that previously we have seen very shambolic so-called public participations before the National Assembly. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, one of our biggest shame as a nation was where public participation is conducted on a bill before the National Assembly, specifically the Finance Bill of 2023. 99% of the people appear before the committee, relevant committee, and oppose the provisions of that bill. And in the end, all of those proposals, all of those suggestions from ordinary Kenyans, from the Kenya Association of Manufacturers, from civil society, from all those quarters are ignored, and the bill is passed anyway. And we hear leaders in the National Assembly pronounce themselves at funerals and other public events that the bill will pass, not even a comma will be amended. I am happy, Honorable Speaker, that given the noise that we made, especially as members of the opposition or the minority in this House, I am seeing stories in the newspaper that members of the National Assembly now are insisting on being taken through provisions of bills before they vote. I think that is progress, although we have set ourselves an extremely low bar where a member of parliament can admit to passing a bill without reading it. But now that we are reading, I think when we go to the election in 2027, we might have a different story. So public participation, and the courts have spoken on this matter, Honorable Speaker, that it cannot be a cosmetic exercise just to check boxes and say we have complied with the law on public participation. It has to be substantial, that the views of the people must reflect in the final document. We as a House and even the National Assembly can never avail ourselves of power to do away with the views of the people on any particular legislation. Honorable Speaker, there is also a very interesting provision under Section 20, subsection 5 and subsection 6 of the bill. And Honorable Speaker, allow me to just read this one out verbatim, because I believe this is meant to intimidate professional staff of the Senate and the National Assembly from actually advising this House to go and avail itself of the options of going to court whenever there is a matter that we believe is not right. And Honorable Speaker, we have enough matters in court to prove that that is also an option that is available for us as a House, because although we are the lawmakers in the land, injustice can also be visited on us, and especially on the Senate as a House. So where, Mr. Speaker, you have a provision of a bill saying under Section 20, subsection 5, that if a court is satisfied that a House of Parliament in an attempt to resolve a dispute has not exhausted all the mechanisms of alternative dispute resolution as contemplated under this section and refers the dispute back for the reason that the House of Parliament has not complied with this section, the expenditure incurred by that House of Parliament in approaching the court shall be regarded as wasteful expenditure. Then it goes on to say under subsection 6 that the cost in respect of wasteful expenditure under subsection 5 shall, in accordance with a prescribed procedure, be recovered without delay from a public or state officer, including a holder of a political office, who caused the House of Parliament not to comply with the requirements of this section. Honorable Speaker, you and I have the privilege of sitting on the Senate Business Committee. You have seen numerous examples of attempts to resolve matters internally that I have failed. Because of various issues, Honorable Speaker, and I can see the Senator Mutinda knows exactly what I'm talking about. It is possible for us to fail to agree internally. And even when attempts are made, there are people who sabotage attempts to resolve matters between the two houses, amicably. So if an officer of the Senate advises the Senate that at the stage at which we are, the only place that we can find a resolution is in the courts, and then they say, oh, by the way, it is Sifuna, as a holder of a political office, as elected member of the SBC, who refused mediation and who said or insisted that we must go to court. And they recover the money from me, Honorable Speaker. This is meant to intimidate people from availing themselves of the option and exercise of the right to approach the courts for dispute resolution. And therefore, on the basis of that, Honorable Speaker, I will be objecting. In fact, today, we received very good news as leaders of political parties. And I am sure even the Secretary Generals of all the other political parties are happy that the High Court has agreed with us that the National Assembly cannot just unilaterally, through a supplementary budget, go and remove all the money that has been allocated to the political parties fund. I am very happy with Justice Muita. He has said that money, once appropriated by the National Assembly, cannot be again reduced through an appropriation act, as happened with the first appropriation act or supplementary budget of September of 2023 that reduced the political parties fund by almost 800 million shillings, Honorable Speaker, when we only had 1.6 billion shillings on that fund. So I am hoping that going forward, I have taken the liberty of sharing that decision with the members of the National Assembly, at least those from my party who I know sit on the Justice and Legal Affairs Committee and on the Budget Committee of the National Assembly. They need to take note of what the court has said. One of the most frustrating things, Honorable Speaker, is that at least for us at ODM and with the political parties fund, we have more than enough court orders, Honorable Speaker. We have a court order that I awarded as 6 billion shillings a few years back. It is now 10 billion shillings. Nobody is bothered about honoring that court order. So when we hear people pontificate out there that they are a rule of law government, and yet they have active court orders that they are ignoring, we know these are hypocrites. So on this particular one, Honorable Speaker, I want to support the committee that in fact we cannot have a situation where our members of the Secretariat are threatened with sanction for advising this House to go to court when there is obvious injustice that has been meted on this particular House. Lastly, Honorable Speaker, and this is a matter that Honorable Cherargei, the Senator for Nandi, spoke about, on this question of joint sittings. And this is why I have always pleaded with my colleagues in this House that when matters such as this come before us, we must show a united front as senators. When you see a member of the National Assembly disparaging the entire Senate, it includes you. Honorable Speaker, what right does the National Assembly have to say that in a joint sitting we will be subject to the rules or the standing orders of the National Assembly? Yet it is a joint sitting. In fact, the fair thing to do, and I'm sure if these rules or these proposals originated from the Senate, we would have special joint sitting rules that accommodate all those, both houses. Honorable Speaker, as you know, I don't attend those joint sessions because they are chaired by Honorable Moses Wetangula. And if Cherargei thinks that, maybe the Speaker of the National Assembly to him, I can assure you that when it comes to me as Sifuna, I would even receive harsher punishment. I have seen some people, Honorable Speaker, online, proposing that maybe during the debate of the finance bill, I should go there and grab the budget and the bill, the finance bill, and run away with it like happened in some country in Asia. Those people don't know the Speaker of the National Assembly. I would be expelled from Parliament for 5 years without even thinking. So, Honorable Speaker, we want the same rules that we are used to debate on here in the Senate should be applied during joint sessions, because it essentially means that we as members of the Senate have to start learning the rules of the National Assembly, yet we are not members of the National Assembly. Honorable Speaker, and by the way, those rules are not necessarily too different, but there are some small differences here and there. And I'm sure you have seen even here, members struggling with our own rules here. So imagine subjecting some of these members who just shout point of order for nothing to the rules in the National Assembly. So, Honorable Speaker, to protect the slow learners in the House, the people who are still acclimatizing with the standing orders 2 years down the line, Honorable Speaker, you cannot subject these members to the rules in the National Assembly. They will fare far worse than they have been doing for the past 2 years here. And you can see, Honorable Speaker, that when you speak about bonds, the old people start crying, thinking you are talking about them. I thank you, Mr. Speaker. I oppose this bill.
Thank you, Senator Sifuna. Senator Monigi Alex Munye.
Asante, Bwana Spika. Mimi napinga mjadala ambaye unahusu mamlaka ya Senate na mambo ya Parliament. Kwa sababu, Bwana Spika, wakati tulienda kwa uchaguzi, kila mmoja katika Kenya anajua alichagua senator, na pia tukajua akachagua wajumbe ambaye ni wale wa chini. Yangu, Bwana Spika, kitu ya kwanza ni kusema tuko na majimbo mandogo 290 ambaye inaakilishwa na wajumbe, na pia tuko na majimbo makubwa 47 na ambayo majimbo iko na magavana, na kazi ya Senate ya au majimbo madogo huwa inaakilishwa na mjumbe mmoja, na kama jimbo kama la Embu liko na majimbo madogo 4, na jimbo na Nairobi liko na majimbo 17, hata kuna majimbo mengine kama jimbo na Kiambu iko na majimbo 12. Kwa hivyo ni aibu kubwa sana kwa majimbo wale ile inaongozwa na waheshimiwa, wamekuwa na mambo, wako na hasira na ile kazi. Sisi majimbo 47 tunafanya kazi, na tunajua wale watu ile kazi wanafanya, wanapatiwa pesa nyingi, ambayo unakuta kama jimbo dogo moja inaakilishwa na mjumbe moja inapata shilingi milioni 160, na pia pesa ya parapara milioni 60, na marufuku mengine inapatikana katika pale kwa ile budget, na ile kazi inafaa afanye ni ya kulipia watoto wa msingi na wa sekondari pesa, na tunaiunga hiyo mambo yote wanafanya. Kazi nyingine ya ile pesa ni mambo ya kutengeneza parapara, ambazo sile parapara wamekuwa wakipigana wakisema wanafanya kazi zote. Ni aibu kubwa sana kwa sababu sisi tukiwa maseneta atuangalie kazi yao, ile kazi wanafanya, na unakuta vitu zetu tukipeleka pale wako na jicho mbaya ya kusema sisi kutuangalia. Kwa hivyo mimi nasema ile mambo wanazungumza kwa hii mjadala ni kitu ambaye ni aibu, na tunajua wakati ukatusi ulikuja ndio mwananchi ambaye ule ako masinani kule vijijini aweze kuisaidia, na sasa wanataka kuturundisha kule miaka mingi ambaye tulitoka. Kwa hivyo sasa, Bwana Spika, mimi napinga, na tuwaambie wanafikiria hawa ni kama wanatembea mbinguni tukiwa huku duniani. Nataka niwaambie sisi sote tuko hapa katika ulimwenguni, wakati wa kwenda mbinguni ni Mungu atakuja kutuchukua. Ya pili, kazi ya seneta. Tumeona kusema kutoka siku ya leo katika Kenya mzima MP wote 349 wanjue seneta, tuko seneta 66 na county 47, na tuko na uwezo wa kuangalia pesa ya county government vile governors wanafanya kazi. Kwa hivyo nataka niambie MP, singeona ni vizuri atunasema pesa ya governor inakuliwa, kwani wewe ni seneta. Kwa hivyo Bwana Spika, mimi naunga mkono, mimi napinga mara 100 mara 200 kwa hii kikaratasi, kwa hii mjadala, kwa sababu ni kitu iko na aibu katika Kenya yetu, na ninataka kusema hakuna mtu mkubwa kama seneta, ni seneta mkubwa kuliko MP. Alafu kutoka kwa seneta ni kuwa kwa gavana. Asante Bwana Spika, napinga mara 100. Ni mimi seneta wa Embu County, daktari ambaye ni deputy party leader in Kenya Kwanza. Asante Bwana Spika.
Order, honorable members. Order, honorable members. Senator Osotsi Godfrey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity. Mr. Speaker, I am even surprised why we are debating this bill, because this bill is a bill that is unconstitutional in almost every clause that I've gone through, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, secondly, in the tradition of bicameral parliament, bicameralism is managed through non-legislative. It's managed outside the law, without specific legislation. It is the norms, it is the tradition, and is a standing order. So for one to decide to come up with a piece of legislation to manage the relationship between the two houses, I think in itself, it is a new standard that the owner of this bill is trying to come up with. Mr. Speaker, I know probably one of the reasons why the owner of this bill is trying to come up with this bill is because of the power struggles that the two houses have had in the past. Mr. Speaker, you remember the petition number 284 of 2019, which led to the High Court nullifying a record 23 pieces of legislation, including the Tax Laws Amendments Act, which the court declared them a nullity. And I think when you read through this bill, you see an attempt to try and patch up things so that we do not have an opportunity of going to court when we feel that there has been some form of discrimination or unfairness on the part of Senate. So this bill, basically, I look at it from that prism, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we are in bicameral parliament, but maybe we need to reflect as a house whether truly we are in a bicameral parliament or we are just something in between there. Because bicameralism has to have an upper house. If you look at other jurisdictions, UK, US, France, even here in Africa, a country like Nigeria in West Africa, bicameralism must have a house that is reasonable, a house that is small, a house that looks at issues with the expert scrutiny, a house that provides further democratic check on the lower house. That is bicameralism. But now, in this country, we basically have two houses. One house that pretends to be an upper house, which is supposed to be a lower house. I think we must have a relook at the way it's structured in this country. Mr. Speaker, I had an opportunity last year to visit the Federal Republic of Nigeria, where I visited the House of Representatives and I also visited the Senate. And when you visit the two houses in that country, even before someone tells you that this is a lower house and this is an upper house, you see for yourself. You see for yourself how the Senate of the Federal Republic of Nigeria is strong and effective. And you remember that is the House. Recently, they rejected the presidential request to send the military to Niger and other countries which had problems. The House acts with some firmness. The House cannot be intimidated. I think the same should happen in Kenya. And I want to thank Senate. We have really tried. In the eyes of the public, we have come out as a more reasonable house, a house that stands with the people, a house that is effective. Unlike our colleagues on the other house, where I served for 5 years, which have become a disgrace to this society. Mr. Speaker, it was a shame the way the National Assembly managed the impeachment motion against Cabinet Secretary Linturi. And I think that should be a wake-up call to Kenyans, that we really need Senate to veto the decisions of National Assembly. Because at this rate, we are not going to have a parliament in this country. I was so disappointed, Mr. Speaker, that when the finance bill 2023 was passed by that House, the members of Parliament, National Assembly were cheering like school children to pass a bill that was going to punish the people of Kenya. And then a few months later, an MP stands somewhere and says, we passed that bill without reading. That is a reason enough for that House to be vetted, to be vetoed by this Senate. And I think someone here, I think is Senator Sifuna, suggested that why can't the Senate also initiate bills to try and correct these wrongs in our parliamentary system, so that we get things to be done in the right manner. Mr. Speaker, in bicameralism, if you look at the history of bicameralism, the Senate, in our case, is a house of calm, is a house that has experts, is a house that takes time to scrutinize matters before they pass. And I think that if this person who came up with this bill really meant well for this country, he should have looked at other jurisdictions where we have bicameralism and understand that our problem is not how we relate with the National Assembly. Our problem is that lack of clarity as to which house is higher than the other. We say we are at the higher house because that is a global best practice. But legally, Mr. Speaker, I think we need to put it in our laws so that it's very clear that which house is bigger than the other. Mr. Speaker, if you read through this bill, you notice that the intention is basically to cripple the Senate and make Senate weak and weak and weak. I have gone through the provisions of this bill, Mr. Speaker, and if you look at clause 7, it is listing a number of laws and basically trying to say that this particular bill should be the powers of the other house. For example, Mr. Speaker, when under C, they say the annual county allocation of revenue bill, that it will be considered by both houses. But they go ahead and deny us the powers to participate in appropriations bill. Mr. Speaker, the Constitution is very clear that the houses of parliament should be involved in budget-making process. Why should we be denied an opportunity to participate in appropriations bill, a finance bill? Because after all, Mr. Speaker, we passed two major instruments in the financial process. The budget policy statement, which this House passes, the medium-term debt management strategy. Why are we involved in passing these two important financial instruments when we cannot be involved in participating in appropriations bill, in finance bill, or any other bill that is a money bill? Mr. Speaker, this is a bigger question that we want answered. Mr. Speaker, this bill also tries to, under clause number 14, where it says, if one house passes an ordinary bill concerning county government and the second house rejects the bill, it shall be referred for mediation committee. Mr. Speaker, on one hand, they want to make sure that Senate does not handle some bills. On the other hand, they want to curtail the Senate so that if Senate passes any bill that concerns counties, then they can veto it and take it to the mediation committee. That is mischief, Mr. Speaker, which I have noted there. Mr. Speaker, also, when you say that this bill affects counties and the other bill does not affect counties, it doesn't make sense at all. Because we are in the same country, and there is no bill that you can say this bill does not affect counties, or this bill affects counties. All bills are the same. They affect counties in one way or another because we are in the same country, Mr. Speaker. So one wanting to legislate to make a decision as to which bill affects counties and which bill does not affect counties should not apply here, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I also find Section 17 of this bill very, very unconstitutional, because Section 17(2) says that at any joint sitting of the House, the standing orders of the National Assembly shall apply. So what do we do with our standing orders in the Senate? They are basically invalidating the standing orders of the Senate, that the standing orders of Senate are inferior to the standing orders of the National Assembly. Mr. Speaker, it goes further to say that the speakers of the House of Parliament shall enforce any directions given during a joint sitting in relation to the conduct of a member of Parliament in accordance with the applicable provisions of the National Assembly standing orders. Mr. Speaker, what this implies is that it elevates the Speaker of the National Assembly to someone even above our own Speaker, that this Speaker of the National Assembly will have the powers to punish a member of the Senate on a matter that has come out before the joint committee. So this is unconstitutional, and Mr. Speaker, this should not see the light of the day. Mr. Speaker, public participation. In fact, now, this bill now goes beyond the main objective, which is managing bicameralism. It goes beyond that to introduce public participation, trying to put roadblocks on the public participation. Mr. Speaker, if you read Section 19, Section 19(3), where it says, a committee of a House of Parliament shall have broad measure of discretion in conducting public participation. What is that, Mr. Speaker? The courts have already ruled on this matter, Mr. Speaker, that public participation should not be cosmetic. Public participation should be done adequately. But this particular section is introducing this clause so that they can, those who like rushing bills through can be able to rush through bills without adequate public participation. And then it goes ahead and talks about hides behind duplication to deny the second house an opportunity to conduct adequate participation on a bill. Mr. Speaker, on the clause 19, 7 and 8, on the validity of the bills which are processed by these houses. Again, this section is unconstitutional. Mr. Speaker, it says, a committee of Parliament shall consider the views received from public participation broadly, meaning that the specific views received from the public will not be given adequate attention. And this law will facilitate that, Mr. Speaker. And 8 says, an act of Parliament is not invalid on account of failure to incorporate any views submitted during public participation. You have seen, Mr. Speaker, the National Assembly. They go to the public. 90% of the views that are given by the public. They are never implemented in the final bill that is passed. One case is the finance bill, Mr. Speaker. Housing bill. All the things that the public said, they were never factored in the final bill that was passed by those houses. So basically, what this is trying to do, Mr. Speaker, is now introducing other provisions using bicameralism to make it easy for the other house to be passing bills without being questioned in court of law as to the adequacy of those bills in terms of public participation. Mr. Speaker, if you look at Section 20 of the bill that says, before formally declaring the existence of a dispute between the Houses of Parliament, the House of Parliament shall in good faith make every reasonable effort and take all the necessary steps to amicably resolve the matter by initiating direct negotiations with each other or through an intermediary. Mr. Speaker, this is basically stopping either house from taking any other measures like going to court on a matter, so that we are not able to take our disputes to court when we are required to go to court, as it has been done in the past. So, Mr. Speaker, generally, bill is unconstitutional. This bill goes against the tenets of bicameralism that is not known globally, and this bill should not even be passed by this House at this stage, the second reading. This bill should be rejected in totality, and this bill is another attempt at killing devolution in this country. And we know that the House that has been persistently been used to kill devolution is the National Assembly. Everything they do, even the way they behave on the ground, Mr. Speaker, management of roads, rural roads in our counties, the National Assembly is an existential threat to devolution in this country. And we thought that now that we have a speaker who has been a senator, things will be different. Mr. Speaker, I am concerned that, in fact, under Speaker Wetangula, the National Assembly has become a very serious threat to devolution. I served in the National Assembly under the current Attorney General, who was against devolution, but not to the extent of the current Speaker. He has basically demonstrated that he cannot.
Senator Osotsi, your time is up. Thank you, Senator Osotsi. Senator Oroba Gloria.
Thank you, Speaker, for this opportunity to stand and weigh in on this bill. Mr. Speaker, I want to take this time also to maybe inform the public of what it takes to even have a bill get to first reading, Mr. Speaker. Because sometimes as legislators, when we are out there advocating and trying to sensitize the public on the work that we do here, Mr. Speaker, the public sometimes thinks that you're lying when you say that getting a bill to first reading literally can cost you an arm and a leg. Mr. Speaker, this bill, even as we discuss it, is a further hindrance or highlights the hindrances that we deal with to even legislate small amendments, one-line amendments, which can impact the public in terms of changing their lives, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I pride myself in being an amateur politician, Mr. Speaker, because in that sense, I get to learn a lot of things, Mr. Speaker. I get to learn from those who carry themselves as veteran politicians. I get to learn from the electorate, I get to learn from the staff who are here. So I'm proud to say that actually I don't know much about standing orders, I don't know much about, I learn. Every day for me is a learning lesson, Mr. Speaker. And I can tell you, with the 6 bills that I have tabled in the 21 or so months that we have been here, Mr. Speaker, I've learned a lot. Mr. Speaker, first of all, I've learned that in the Senate, you can have a bill that is clearly touching on devolution, that you are passionate about, you draft it, you work with the legal clerks here, they help you on all those things. You get to a place where you have a first draft, you go through the committee stage, you go through publishing, public participation, first reading, second reading. You even get to a point where your fellow senators might want to punish you because they don't like you, so they want to drop your bill. You get past that, Mr. Speaker, only to find out that even after all of that, even if that bill passes here, the National Assembly will squash it, Mr. Speaker. Just to give you statistics of how it looks like right now, Mr. Speaker, because sometimes when we speak, I like to use data. In this 13th Parliament, the Senate has had 94 bills that have been published. Out of those 94 bills that have been published, Mr. Speaker, you will find that those that actually went through concurrence are 22. The Senate bills that are undergoing concurrence right now are 22. And from those 22, you'll find that the Senate bills passed and referred to the National Assembly, but have not been concluded at just 18. So if you go through the statistics here, and you compare the bills that the Senate is passing, and the bills that the National Assembly is passing and bringing to our House for concurrence, Mr. Speaker, you will see that as a House, we are actually very friendly towards the National Assembly, just from the data that has been put out in terms of the number of bills that the Senate has concurred with the National Assembly and has gone ahead to pass, Mr. Speaker. But one of the things that we don't highlight enough, Mr. Speaker, is that there are bills that originate from the National Assembly that come to the Senate, and the Senate actually does not give concurrence because certain issues need to be discussed, they touch on devolution, and certain things have to be dealt with at the Senate. Mr. Speaker, but nevertheless, those bills are still passed in the National Assembly, concluded, and to anyone's shock out there, even without the Senate concurring and agreeing to those bills are passed, and the National Assembly quickly takes those bills to the President to assent into law, Mr. Speaker. An example of that is the Land Laws Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 65 of 2023 of the Majority Leader. That bill, Mr. Speaker, actually did not get concurrence from the Senate. The Senate wanted to participate in certain issues, but Mr. Speaker, without our participation, without the upper house actually engaging in that bill was signed into law. Mr. Speaker, another example is that Statute Law Miscellaneous Amendment number 2, National Assembly Bill number 68, 2023, again by the Majority Leader, Mr. Speaker. That bill was assented into law without the participation and concurrence of the Senate, Mr. Speaker, the Senate being the upper house. Mr. Speaker, I find it very difficult to understand how then a proposed bill from the National Assembly by a National Assembly legislator can even be brought to this House to try and correct the wrongdoings that actually the National Assembly is participating in, Mr. Speaker. Because in this same data, there are no bills that have come from the Senate that have not sought concurrence in the National Assembly that have been assented to law, Mr. Speaker. The bad behavior is coming from the National Assembly. Mr. Speaker, in the last Parliament, 73 acts which had already been signed into law by the President were repealed, Mr. Speaker, because someone went to court and literally took the court through the process of a bill passing into law. And it meant that there should be concurrence from the upper house, from the Senate. 73 acts were repealed by the courts because they did not go through that procedure. They did not come to Senate, Mr. Speaker. The National Assembly was then asked to go and sit down with the Senate and regularize those 73 acts. Mr. Speaker, in their usual manner, the National Assembly, they did not want to come and sit with the upper house to regularize and follow the procedure to have those acts actually properly passed into law. Instead, they went back to court. They went to the Supreme Court, Mr. Speaker. When they went to the Supreme Court, they went to basically appeal and argue that these 73 acts should remain as law, Mr. Speaker, because they simply did not want to sit with the upper house. At that point, Mr. Speaker, because the president had already signed those 73 acts into law, it was an embarrassment to even the Republic of Kenya, showing how disorganized we are as a parliament. So, in an aim to actually save face, the Supreme Court again gave a timeline and said that the upper house and the lower house, the National Assembly, should sit down and fix what needs to be fixed. Mr. Speaker, to date, nothing has happened. So that should tell you, first of all, Mr. Speaker, that Senate, we are not the aggressors. We are not the people who are going out of our way to do the wrong things, Mr. Speaker. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, as I stand today, I will give you an example of what happens, and I'm glad that I get this opportunity. Of my 6 bills, one of the bills that I have is the Whistleblower Protection Bill, Mr. Speaker, which I inherited from a previous senator who had been pushing this whistleblower protection bill through the Jailer Committee. So the bill had been drafted, we fine-tuned it into what is currently happening in the country. Mr. Speaker, I proposed it. I went through a caucus as well that I sit in, the APNAC caucus, Mr. Speaker. I brought it here. The JLAC committee passed it and said, you know, this bill is proper. It should now go ahead into the procedure, Mr. Speaker. If you look at the summary of the bills that are apparently undergoing concurrence from the Senate to the National Assembly, that my bill, the Whistleblower Protection Bill, is apparently one of the bills that is awaiting for National Assembly to say, okay, this bill is proper, it's not a money bill, it is drafted in a way that is constitutional, so go ahead and move forward, Mr. Speaker. As I wait, if you look at this summary that I have, and this is a public document of all the legislative agenda for both houses, as I wait for my bill on the whistleblower protection to be approved on the concurrence from the National Assembly so that we can continue with it here, Mr. Speaker, I will draw your attention to a bill by Honorable Irene Kasalu, a member of parliament from the National Assembly. She has a bill called the Whistleblower Protection Bill, National Assembly Bill number 56 of 2023, a copy-paste of my bill, Mr. Speaker. So, as I am waiting for the National Assembly to tell me that the bill that I inherited, which has in fact originated from the Senate, because I did not inherit it from the National Assembly, Mr. Speaker. I inherited it from a former senator who had been working on it in the Senate where it originated from. Mr. Speaker, I tabled it, JLAC approved it because they were familiar with it. And Mr. Speaker, as I am waiting, Honorable Kasilu has already inherited the bill. And I can promise you, Mr. Speaker, because I know, and now, as much as I keep saying I'm an amateur, and I know other senators, pride themselves, they know the standing, they know everything. Me, I don't know much, but I know this much. My bill will not get concurrence from National Assembly. But Irene Kasalu will be allowed to proceed with the same bill, Mr. Speaker. You know, as much as we don't like shouting about the mess that we have internally, either within Senate or within National Assembly, you know, you get to a point, Mr. Speaker, the frustration of what you're dealing with. First of all, the basic logistics of running your business in Parliament, the new changes with the Bunge Towers, the fights become so many that by the time you are now actually fighting for a legislative agenda, Mr. Speaker, and you ask yourself, is it really worth it? Mr. Speaker, my sanitary towels bill that I tabled and even officially launched on International Menstrual Hygiene Day last year, May 27th last year. I even launched it. The cabinet secretary and the PS for the legislative agenda acknowledged it. It was a public document that I launched that I've been waiting for it to be processed internally, Mr. Speaker. If you go through where that bill is, again, in the number of bills that are waiting to be approved, so to speak, seeking concurrence from the National Assembly, you will see that my bill of the free sanitary towels is one of them there. Since May last year, Mr. Speaker, I'm still waiting to be told that this bill is in fact a bill that affects counties, Mr. Speaker. That this bill is in fact a bill that is not just centralized as a money bill. I'm waiting for National Assembly, the same county women representatives who are crying and screaming and saying that they are not receiving sanitary towels, Mr. Speaker. Their house, the National Assembly, is the one that is actually slowing down a legislative proposal that is supposed to permanently cure period poverty. That is the irony of the things that we do here in Parliament, Mr. Speaker. I can go on and on about examples that are personal to me in terms of my bills. The Konza Technopolis bill, in terms of data protection bill, all my bills. In fact, at this point, I feel, if not for anything, I can come back here as a consultant on the legislative agenda, because there is no office that I don't know in terms of pushing your agenda and pushing your legislative agenda, Mr. Speaker. I have knocked on doors, I have camped in corridors waiting for whoever I need to wait for to ensure that a draft is moved from one point to another. But it doesn't matter, because even if I do all of that within the Senate, once we are done at the Senate, Mr. Speaker, a National Assembly committee will sit and say, this bill does not affect counties, Mr. Speaker. Then my question comes, when a Senate bill is taken to the National Assembly and they thoroughly go through it with whichever internal processes they have, and they come back and tell you, we are rejecting, we're not going to give you concurrence because this bill does not affect counties. The fundamental question then is, if that bill does not affect counties, when it is passed to law, should counties actually, take up the law? Because if from the legislative agenda they are saying, this bill does not affect counties, fine, then pass it. But then also don't expect that counties should be able to, take the law as any other law. So the issue of the bill does not affect counties, to me, is neither here nor there, Mr. Speaker. The issue of, is it a money bill or not a money bill, Mr. Speaker? Every single bill that originates from this House will touch on resources one way or another. There's no bill that you will come here to the Senate to amend that does not touch one way or another on money. So it's like a lazy kind of thinking where someone just wants to make sure they shoot down your bill. They say, oh, that's a money bill, Mr. Speaker. All bills touch on resources. All resources are tied to money. So maybe what we need to even first of all talk about before we even discuss a bill originating from the National Assembly, Mr. Speaker, and just excuse me for saying this, the fact that we have even prioritized the debate on this bill before my free sanitary towels bill, Mr. Speaker, as much as I'm calling out people in the National Assembly, can I also just call out our Senate Business Committee? We are prioritizing bills originating from the National Assembly, and our in-house bills in the Senate are sitting, Mr. Speaker. At the end of the day, we are losing. We are losing the war. You could be winning this small battle, but we are losing the war. Can we even as a perspective of the Senate, can we first understand that if National Assembly is waking up day and night to kill devolution and fight the upper house, why are we even prioritizing debating what honestly is an unconstitutional amendment or proposal of a legislative agenda, Mr. Speaker? I have to say that we have allowed, and when I say we, the veteran politicians have allowed for a long time for many things to go wrong. And we've been sitting on the sideline, because I just came here 20 months ago, Mr. Speaker. The issues we are having, the logistical issues we are even having with our own offices, it is because we have allowed it. We are members, we are senators, but we are being steered and we are being, we are being governed by people who, first of all, are not elected in any way, whether specially elected or through the ballot. Those are the people who are running the businesses of this house. And I don't know how better way to say it, but I'll say, Mr. Speaker, before we start pointing fingers, let us clean up our own house, starting with whether we really need the joint services or whether we are, governed by our own commissioners. We have a lot of in-house problems that we need to deal with before we start debating a bill that has originated from National Assembly. In itself, it is a paradox. I want to oppose this bill, and I want to strongly suggest to the Senate Business Committee, you continue to insult us by prioritizing the bills from National Assembly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Mwenye Haji Mohamed Faki.
Asante Bwana Spika kwa kunipa fursa hii kuchangia mswada wa sheria ya nyumba za bunge. Mheshimiwa Spika, naona kiongozi wangu naibu wa kiongozi wangu ana ghadhabu kidogo, nataka nichukue dakika chache. Lakini Mheshimiwa Spika, kwanza kabisa ningependa kuipongeza kamati yako ya sheria na haki kwa mapendekezo yake kwamba bunge la Senate likatae